Is not feeling well, so if my voice cracks, don't laugh at me.
Okay.
Okay. So who here wants to be rich? Yeah. Okay. How about powerful? Rich and powerful. If you ask me, my hand would be up all the time. I'm responding to the advocate's claim that the influence of wealthy political donors has a negative effect on the democratic process. The advocate's supporting claims are 1, that the U.S. is becoming a plutocracy, 2, politicians are biased toward major political donors, and 3, that the U.S. tried and failed to establish regulations to reduce the corrupting influence of money. In responding to the first point, I would argue that society becoming a plutocracy is an exaggeration. To begin, the advocate's first point contradicts with the major claim. He argues that the U.S. is becoming a plutocracy, which means that society is governed by the rich. But if that's true, then why would we need wealthy political donors to contribute to their campaigns in the first place? If they already control all the wealth, then they don't need donors and there would be no democracy. In addition, the speaker explains that the majority of our elected officials are very rich, but does not provide a sufficient does not provide sufficient evidence or statistics to help the listeners understand just how much. Majority could mean anything from 51% to 99%, and very rich could mean anything from having a salary of $100,000 a year to $1 million or to really anything. It's pretty ambiguous. President Obama has also made significant strides in redistributing the wealth in America and turning around plutocracy. The Front Page magazine uses a fictional American, Joe, as an example of this to better understand. Now, Joe is said to be a single 54-year-old alcoholic and a drug-abusing man who has never held a full-time job. This man makes about $16,000 a year, and if he chooses the bronze plan for his health care, which is a monthly average of $453 to a normal person, because of redistribution of wealth, Joe qualifies for $452 in average monthly subsidies, meaning that regardless of which bronze plan he chooses, he will pay a monthly premium of exactly $1. Now, sorry to throw all these numbers at you, but really, all you need to know is that Joe only pays $1 for something that's $453 for someone who's richer. Doesn't seem plutocratic. If the wealthy controlled the country, they wouldn't allow this. Next, the advocate argues that politicians are biased towards major political donors. Now, let me remind you that the major claim was that the influence of wealthy political donors has a negative effect on the democratic process. He uses the information that Tom Steyer planned to spend $100 million in the 2014 election in order to enact climate change measures. What the advocate failed to do was mention why this is such a negative thing. To me, it doesn't sound like such a negative thing that the issue of climate change is raised in a national election. More information would help the listeners understand. These donations are also necessary for the democratic process. So say I wanted to run for president. Without donors, I would not be able to pay for advertisements, for travel, for all those nice suits that they wear, and you name it. And believe me, I have some good ideas to turn this country around. So vote for me. But my point is that I would need political donors to contribute to my campaign in order for me to express my opinions, my personal views, which is democratic. Political donations give people a chance to change the country in a positive way, however they see it. Lastly, the advocate explains that the U.S. tried and failed to establish regulations to reduce the corrupting influence of money in politics. That's really a fact, and it can't be disputed with the appropriate evidence, but the word corrupting instantly gives the sentence a negative connotation, which again, political donations does not necessarily mean bad things or corrupting things will occur. Money is how anyone gets elected to public office, and it doesn't always result in a bad thing. Otherwise, everything would be negative and there may not be a democratic America. To conclude, with all the new systems in place designed to redistribute wealth in the U.S., the U.S. is not becoming a plutocracy. Political donations are necessary to the democratic process, and money does not always result in corruption. Thank you.
Well, David, I think that you've got nice delivery that's personable and relates to the audience. It puts it in the context of, look, we're evaluating this from a particular point of view. Let's look at it from that point of view. And I think that that's an effective way to get the audience to listen to your arguments. The notion of a plutocracy being an exaggeration, I think, is a reasonable challenge. I'm not exactly sure that the notion that they need donors demonstrates that there isn't a plutocracy is the best way to prove that. I think maybe the one thing to argue is that we have multiple donors from multiple sources, and it's not hard to find some information, for instance, on political campaigns that suggests that the vast majority of their money comes from smaller donations too. I think that there's good evidence on that. But in the last election cycle, there was some statistic like that 90% of the money that Obama spent and 87% of the money, something like that Romney spent, came from donations of less than $100 each. So, they are spending a lot of money, but most of the donations are small donations. The notion that that a small group of people is doing all the financing is problematic. So I think that there's a little bit more that you could do on that point, but you make the point relatively clear. And then you kind of have this argument about really would the rich allow this sort of redistribution that's going on if they had control over what's going on. And I think your example is a pretty good one that says, look, clearly not all of the policies of the country are designed to favor the rich. Here's one of those examples where this is obviously designed to favor a 54-year-old alcoholic who takes drugs. Who doesn't fit into that particular category, who only makes $16,000 a year. And I think that that's a good illustration, and you had a source citation on that. I like that. On the second point, I do think that you do a good job talking about how there's a negative connotation being associated with this, and it's really, there's a value issue that goes on here. If we look at a donation as automatically being corrupting, then you're going to see it as being corrupting. But like you said, spending $100 million to achieve something that you think is valuable and important is not automatically a bad thing. If spending $100 million gets you candidates that support control of carbon emissions and it protects the environment and saves us in the long run, why is that a negative sort of thing? The fact that somebody is altruistic enough to spend their $100 million that way ought to count for something instead of the notion that they are some power-hungry puppeteer behind the scenes pulling the strings. They are, in fact, donating for a particular cause. And my guess would be is that you would find most of the big donors are cause-oriented rather than power-oriented. In other words, do they seek to have influence? Yes, but they seek to have influence not like consult me before you do anything, but we think this is the point of view that is correct, and we want you to look at our point of view and do that sort of thing. And that's the argument that I think you're ultimately making. And then on the last point, you kind of go to the corruption issue again, and I thought that you had a very good summary on those arguments. I'm sorry that you're not feeling well. If you're at all contagious, you should leave.